On Wednesday, April 9th, a drone appeared over Nancy Guthrie's house. Not for the first time in this investigation. Not as a routine aerial survey conducted in the early days when search teams were combing the terrain and law enforcement was deploying every available resource across the Catalina foothills. This was day 68, 10 weeks after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. 2.5 months after the masked figure appeared on the doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning and the pacemaker went silent at 2:28. 68 days after the investigation that was supposed to find her began with a detective who had never worked a homicide case in a department that initially thought she had wandered away from home. On day 68, a drone was hovering over her house, and on the ground below it, law enforcement was present, active, moving, doing something that required them, when a reporter from the Mirror US parked nearby to observe, to approach that reporter directly and say, "You need to leave this neighborhood and not come back. This is an active investigation," and then follow his vehicle out of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood to make sure he left. That is not nothing. That is the opposite of nothing. A department that has abandoned a case does not send a drone over the crime scene on day 68. A department that is passively waiting for forensic results to come back from a laboratory does not deploy personnel to maintain a perimeter and remove press from the immediate vicinity of the property. A department that has quietly concluded, as some have speculated, that this investigation has moved into a cold case holding pattern does not follow a reporter's car out of the neighborhood. Something is happening at that property. Law enforcement knows what it is. They are not sharing it. And the drone on Wednesday morning is the most tangible evidence we have that the investigation is not standing still, that investigators are doing something at the scene on day 68 that they were not able to do or had not yet done in the 67 days before it, day 69. And this is where we are. This is Forensic Disconnect. And today we are going to do something that most coverage of this case has not done. We are going to connect 3 things that happened this week into a single coherent picture. The drone over the house. The most technically detailed explanation of the DNA problem that CeCe Moore has ever provided publicly, and the institutional accountability timeline that is now moving toward a hard deadline, with Sheriff Chris Nanos having 10 business days to respond under oath to the Pima County Board of Supervisors. These 3 things are not separate stories. They are the same story. The story of where this investigation is, where it is going, what the obstacles are, and what the path through those obstacles looks like. And when you hold them together, the picture that emerges is more complex and more hopeful than the media coverage of the last 10 days has suggested. Before we go further, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is what we do every day. We go deeper than the headlines. We connect the pieces that other channels cover separately. We explain the forensic science so that it actually makes sense, not as background noise, but as the specific technical reality that will determine whether this case gets solved and when. Subscribe so you are here when the next piece of the picture arrives. Now, let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of this week, the beginning of the investigation. Because to understand why the drone over the house on Wednesday matters, you need to understand what the first 67 days looked like and what they did not produce. Nancy Guthrie was last seen alive on the evening of January 31st, 2026. Her son-in-law drove her home from a family dinner. Her garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later. She went inside. He drove away. And sometime in the hours that followed, between that moment and approximately 2:28 in the morning of February 1st, when her pacemaker lost its connection to her phone, she was taken. The doorbell camera recorded a masked figure at 1:47 a.m., armed with a holstered weapon, wearing gloves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, approaching the camera, attempting to remove it, covering the lens with foliage. The figure disappeared from the footage. At 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker disconnected, and at some point before dawn, Nancy was gone. When her family arrived the following morning, after she failed to appear for her regular Sunday church service and could not be reached, they found the back doors propped open with her own flower pots, her phone inside, her purse inside, her keys inside, her medication, the daily heart medication her pacemaker-supported cardiovascular system required, inside, and on the front step, blood. Her blood, as DNA testing would later confirm. The investigation that followed has been marked by institutional failures that have been documented, named, and criticized by former sheriffs, former FBI agents, former prosecutors, and the deputies themselves. A detective who had never worked a homicide case led the investigation for 33 days. The crime scene was corrupted, according to the former Pima County Sheriff, who held the same office. A pizza delivery car was allowed to drive across the front lawn during the active processing. Investigators initially treated the case as a search and rescue. They believed Nancy had wandered off, rather than as the violent kidnapping that the blood and the disabled camera and the masked figure should have immediately indicated it was. A task force did not exist for 33 days. The man overseeing all of it had resigned from his first law enforcement job in 1982 rather than face termination for excessive force, and had apparently denied under oath in a December 2025 deposition that he had ever been suspended, despite documented evidence of 8 suspensions in 6 years. That is the context. That is what the first 67 days looked like. And against that backdrop, a drone over the house on day 68 is a signal that something has changed, that someone has decided to go back, that the case is not, despite everything, standing still. Now let's talk about what the drone might be looking for, because this is where CeCe Moore's comments this week become essential. CeCe Moore is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the firm that pioneered the use of investigative genetic genealogy in law enforcement applications in the United States. She has solved more than 300 cases, cold cases, violent crimes, Jane Does and John Does whose identities had been unknown for decades, using a technique that takes partial DNA matches from consumer genealogy databases and builds family trees that eventually narrow to a single living individual who matches the genetic profile in question. She used this technique, or a version of it, to build the case against Brian Kohberger. She has used it in hundreds of cases since. She is, without serious competition, the most experienced and credentialed practitioner of this discipline working with law enforcement today. She is not directly involved in the Nancy Guthrie case. She has been careful to say that clearly, but she has worked with the laboratory that is currently analyzing the DNA evidence from Nancy's home. And she knows, from her professional experience with that laboratory and with cases like this one, what the specific challenges of this evidence look like from the inside. What she said this week in a cross appearances on Brian Enton Investigates and in an interview with the Truth of the Matter podcast is the most technically detailed and the most candid assessment of the DNA situation in this case that has been offered by any credentialed expert since the investigation began. Here is what she said, and here is what it means. In late February, Sheriff Nanos disclosed that DNA had been recovered from inside Nancy's home. He described it as mixed. That one word, mixed, is the most important word in the forensic history of this investigation, and it has not received the full explanation it deserves in most media coverage of this case. A mixed DNA sample means that the genetic material recovered from a surface contains DNA from more than one person. This happens more often than people realize, particularly with touch DNA, the microscopic traces left behind when a person handles an object. Think about a doorknob. Over the course of months or years, dozens of people may have touched that doorknob. Each one left a microscopic trace of their genetic material. When forensic investigators swab that doorknob, they collect a mixture, the combined DNA of every person who ever touched it. The mixture might contain strong contributions from recent visitors and faint contributions from people who touched it years ago. It might contain obvious contributions from the homeowner and trace contributions from a repair person who visited once. It might contain DNA from the perpetrator of a crime, but buried in a complex biological puzzle alongside DNA from other individuals who have no connection to the crime whatsoever. The process of separating those individual contributions, of identifying which genetic material belongs to which person, is called deconvolution, and deconvolution is where the Nancy Guthrie investigation is currently stuck. Moore explained the problem with unusual clarity. The companies that work with law enforcement to build DNA profiles for investigative genetic genealogy are now using whole genome sequencing, a technique that is extraordinarily sensitive, capable of detecting the tiniest trace amounts of genetic material. The sensitivity of whole genome sequencing is what makes it so powerful for forensic purposes. It can find DNA that earlier techniques would have missed entirely, but that sensitivity is also a problem when the sample is mixed. Because whole genome sequencing picks up everything, every contribution, no matter how small, from every person who ever left a trace on that surface. And right now, Moore said, there are no good techniques to deconvolute whole genome sequencing data from a complex mixture. The tools that exist for separating standard STR profiles from a mixture do not work well, or at all, on the kind of high-resolution whole genome data that modern forensic analysis produces. The software needed to solve this specific problem does not currently exist in a form that the FBI or its partner laboratories can access and deploy. Read that again. This is not a matter of backlog. This is not a matter of the laboratory being overwhelmed with cases. This is not something that more funding or more personnel would resolve. The fundamental technical tool required to extract a usable DNA profile from the specific type of complex mixed sample recovered from Nancy's home has not yet been developed and deployed. The FBI is waiting for science to advance. The laboratory that received the sample is hoping that technology currently in development will become available before the mixture degrades beyond the point where it can be analyzed. And Moore said that the timeline for that technology may be shorter than previously anticipated. She said she believes, based on what Nanos has publicly disclosed and what she knows about the companies working in this space, that a firm was planning to release a new mixture deconvolution software tool later in 2026. That timeline, she said, appears to have been accelerated because of this case. Because Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has made the need for this technology impossible to ignore. Because the most visible and emotionally urgent missing persons case in the country is sitting, waiting, on a piece of DNA evidence that cannot be read with any tool currently available, and the companies that could build that tool know it. She said, Nancy's case is certainly the one that's making this a top priority, but it's something we really need in the field anyway. That is remarkable. The disappearance of an 84-year-old woman in Tucson, Arizona, is accelerating the development of forensic technology that will be used in thousands of cases for decades to come. The urgency of this investigation has compressed a development timeline that would otherwise have played out over a year or more. When the software exists and is deployed, when it is used to deconvolute the mixed sample from Nancy's home and produce a usable profile, it will also be used on every other complex mixed sample sitting in every other laboratory in the country, in cases that have been waiting for exactly this tool for years. That is the hidden legacy of this case, whatever its resolution. Now, back to the drone. Because the timing of the drone on April 9th, 2 days after Moore's most public and most detailed comments about returning to the scene to collect additional DNA, is not something to dismiss. Moore was explicit. If investigators have not been successful in finding a clean, isolatable source of the perpetrator's DNA at Nancy's home from the samples already collected, they should go back. Because the perpetrator was inside that house for an estimated 40 to 42 minutes, a theory that circulates among investigators and that Moore referenced explicitly. And in 40 to 42 minutes, Moore said, it is almost impossible not to leave DNA behind. Think about what 42 minutes inside a house looks like. You are not standing still. You are moving through rooms. You are touching surfaces, door handles, countertops, furniture, objects you need to move. You are possibly sitting, kneeling, lying down, depending on what you are doing there. You are breathing, and exhaled breath deposits trace DNA in the immediate environment. You are handling the person you came to take, and that physical contact transfers genetic material in both directions. Every surface you touch, every object you move, every breath you exhale, all of it deposits the microscopic evidence of your genetic identity. The perpetrator was in that house for 42 minutes. He was not wearing a hazmat suit. He was wearing gloves. We know that from the doorbell camera footage. But gloves do not prevent all transfer of genetic material. They do not prevent shedding of skin cells in environments where movement creates static and friction. They do not prevent the transfer of material from hair, from sweat, from contact surfaces that gloves do not cover. Moore's argument is that there is DNA in that house that has not yet been found. That the samples collected in the early days of the investigation, when the search and rescue framework and the inexperienced detective and the corrupted crime scene combined to create conditions that were not optimal for thorough forensic collection, may have missed sources that are still there, untouched, waiting. If the drone on April 9th represents a return to the scene for additional forensic collection, if investigators heard Moore's assessment and decided to go back with fresh eyes and the specific goal of finding a cleaner source of the perpetrator's DNA, then that drone is one of the most significant developments in this investigation since the original crime scene was processed. We do not know that is what the drone was doing. Law enforcement has not confirmed it. But the timing, combined with Moore's public statements, combined with the confrontational response to press presence at the scene, suggests that something at the property has warranted renewed attention. Now let's place all of this in the context of the other forensic lead that has been running in parallel since February, the Bitcoin. The ransom notes that arrived in the first week after Nancy's disappearance demanded payment in cryptocurrency. A Bitcoin wallet address was provided. That wallet has been monitored publicly since February and has never received a payment. The wallet sits empty. But the wallet address and the technical metadata surrounding the emails that contained it represents a forensic trail that the FBI has been following since the first notes arrived. Cybersecurity expert Ari Redbord said last week that the FBI considers the Bitcoin trail their best lead in this case, not the DNA, which is currently unreadable, not the doorbell camera footage, which shows the perpetrator but does not identify him, the Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency infrastructure that someone set up to receive a ransom payment that was never made. The reason Bitcoin is traceable is the blockchain, the public, permanent, immutable ledger on which every Bitcoin transaction in history is recorded. Every wallet address, every transaction between wallets, every moment of movement in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, all of it is there, permanently, for anyone with the tools to read it. And the FBI has those tools. Firms like TRM Labs, whose global head of policy Ari Redbord has spoken publicly about this case, have spent years developing blockchain analytics capabilities that can trace cryptocurrency from wallet to wallet, identify patterns that link addresses to known entities, and follow the chain of transactions until it arrives at a point where a real person had to provide real identity verification to access the funds. The person who created the Nancy Guthrie ransom wallet believed they were invisible. They believed that Bitcoin meant anonymity. They believed that a distributed public ledger was somehow less traceable than a bank account. They were wrong. The trail exists. It has existed since the moment they created that wallet, and it is permanent. It will not degrade. It will not fade. It will not be lost to time the way a fiber or a fingerprint might be. Every transaction that wallet has ever been part of is recorded on the blockchain forever. Redbord said, "Crypto is the ultimate crime scene. Every transaction is traceable, trackable, and immutable. It's there forever." The FBI is following that trail. Whatever it leads to, the creator of the wallet, the person who set up the ransom infrastructure, whoever built the cryptocurrency architecture for this abduction, the blockchain will get them there eventually. The question is only how many hops through how many wallets the trail requires before it arrives at a name. Now let's turn to the institutional accountability picture, because it is approaching a critical moment. The Pima County Board of Supervisors formally gave Sheriff Nanos 10 business days on April 7th to provide a written or verbal response under oath to questions about his employment history and his management of the department. 10 business days from April 7th. That deadline falls on or around April 21st. Whatever Nanos provides, whatever he says in that sworn response, will become part of the permanent public record of this investigation. Nanos has said he will comply. His department has said he has always been transparent and will provide a report. But compliance with the statute and accountability for the documented record of his conduct are two different things. The statute's mechanism for removal requires refusal, not unsatisfactory answers, not contradictions of documented evidence, but outright refusal to appear and respond. If Nanos shows up and provides sworn statements, even statements that are inconsistent with the record of 8 suspensions and a resignation in lieu of termination from El Paso, the board's legal path to removing him under this specific mechanism may be limited. The county is paying outside counsel to work through exactly this question. The answer will determine what accountability actually looks like and whether the mechanism the board has invoked can produce the consequence that the public, the deputies, and the supervisors themselves appear to want. Nanos, for his part, showed this week that he is not going quietly. He told a local television station, "You cannot attack my department." He defended the lead detective who had never worked a homicide case before being assigned the most complex kidnapping investigation in Arizona history, citing 2 other cases that were solved within days. Within days. He is offering cases that took days as a defense of a case that has taken 69 days and produced no arrest. The 241-0 no-confidence vote from his own deputies remains the most damning public assessment of his leadership. 241 deputies, 0 votes of confidence, 65 abstentions. That is not a close vote. That is not a divided department. That is a department that looked at its leader and said unanimously, without a single dissenting voice, "We do not believe in this person." Former FBI agent Jason Pack said this week that he believes the case is approaching a turning point. Not because of a single dramatic breakthrough, but because of the compounding pressure that the combination of Savannah's return to national television, the $1 million reward, and the relentless media attention has built over 10 weeks. He said, "At some point, someone is going to make that call. Someone in a cell who heard something. Someone in the Sonoran corridor who saw something. Someone who has been sitting with a detail for 10 weeks, telling themselves it probably doesn't matter, until they see Savannah's face on the morning news and decide it does. The tip lines are open. The reward is active. Anonymous means anonymous. And the drone over the house on Wednesday morning means that investigators are not waiting. They are working, going back, looking for what they might have missed." CeCe Moore asked the public to do one specific thing. If you have taken a consumer DNA test, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, download your raw data file and upload it to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. Those are the only databases law enforcement can legally access for investigative genetic genealogy. The larger those databases become, the more likely it is that a partial match to the perpetrator's DNA exists somewhere in them. One person opting in could be the distant cousin whose genetic material creates the thread that leads to a name. That is something you can do right now, tonight. It takes 15 minutes. It costs nothing. And it might be the thing that changes everything. Day 69. The drone was there. The DNA software is being built faster because of this case. The Bitcoin trail is permanent, and the FBI is following it. CeCe Moore says the perpetrator left DNA in that house, and she believes investigators should go back and find it. The Board of Supervisors has given Nanos 10 days to answer under oath. And the second crime scene, wherever Nancy was taken after her home, is waiting somewhere to be discovered, carrying DNA that has not been compromised by the institutional failures of the first 33 days. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, 5 feet tall, silver hair, and blue eyes. She was taken from her home 69 days ago without her shoes and without the daily medication her heart requires to function. She raised 3 children alone after their father died when Savannah was 16. She collected 20,000 signatures on a clipboard to save a university program. She tended flower pots on her back patio that someone picked up and used to prop open her back doors on the night they took her. She showed her daughter, by everything she ever was and everything she ever did, what it looks like to get up when the world falls apart. Her daughter got up this week, every morning, at that desk, in yellow, ready or not. Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found. She deserves justice, and whoever took her, however long they have benefited from the failures of the first 33 days, however carefully they believe they have covered their tracks, the blockchain is permanent. The DNA is in a laboratory. The software to read it is being built right now, and a drone flew over her house on Wednesday morning. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. Submit tips at tips.FBI.gov. Call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900. The combined reward is over $1 million. Tips are completely anonymous. And if you have taken a consumer DNA test, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage, please download your raw data and upload it to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. It takes 15 minutes. It could change everything. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. Drop a comment. What do you think the drone over the scene means? Do you think investigators found something new? And do you believe the DNA software will crack this case when it arrives? We read every single comment. Day 69, the drone was there. We will be back Monday.